Welcome to Imperfect Momming. Our children are constantly looking to us for examples. The term role model doesn't quite cut it here. We are shaping their worldview with every move we make. You see, it's not in the lectures we give or moments where we are actively attempting to teach them. It's in the micro movements we make, the unconscious ways in which we navigate life. We are constantly teaching our children how to show up for themselves, their friends, their future partners, and even their future children. So what can we do to ensure we are raising thoughtful, compassionate, self-aware human beings? We have to become them ourselves. No one is perfect, but we can still all be better, and it starts with self-healing. Let's get to it. Welcome back to Imperfect Momming, and we have a very special guest today, Michelle Anhang. Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Who am I? Oh, the existential question. Well, I am a mom of two boys, and I am also a mental health coach, which means I support people in creating a lifestyle that supports their mental health. My belief is that our society is pretty disempowering when it comes to mental health challenges. You know, you go to the doctor and they say, here, take these pills and off you go. And you're lucky if you find your own therapy, and a pretty fragmented system, and it's pretty disempowering overall. And just through my own life experiences, which I'm sure we're going to delve into shortly, I have discovered there are many things that we can do to ensure or at least support our mental health on our own. And so that is the gap that I am hoping to fill and am filling in the mental health system.
Yeah, because I think that it's very, at least pre-COVID, I think it's getting a little bit better now that, unfortunately, a lot of people, were struggling with their mental health, struggling being away from people, struggling being alone. I would be interested in seeing the statistics of the number of divorces and I know that I've seen a couple of celebrities that have gotten divorced during this time, and just but it's really brought to light in a good way the mental health struggles. But until now, it's been like, you don't tell people you're depressed, you don't tell people that you're struggling, you don't tell people, you have to put on a happy face, like even in like, how are you doing today? The answer is, oh, I'm good, I'm fine, I'm okay, and not nobody, but most people don't like question it. And they're not even, when they're asking like, how are you, they're doing it while they're walking away. Right?
I agree, we're doing much better. And at the same time, there's still quite a bit of this, wanting to put on this mask and show this face. I'm seeing it a lot in the corporate world. Like, when you think about like team meetings and, just any kind of work meetings, everyone comes online and everyone's dressed up and looks great. And, how are you? Fine. But really, like, behind the door, the dog is scratching on the door, the kids are crying in the other room, there's the soup that's, overflowing on the stove, and, maybe the mess all around that nobody can see. Right. And so we still have a little ways to go with that. Of just, just being really honest and treating mental health like we would any other kind of physical health. If we had a cold, we'd be like, I have a cold, I'm feeling under the weather, and we're not as transparent about that.
Right. Yeah. Even my sister-in-law yesterday, I went over to her house to give my nieces some nail polish that was just collecting dust in my drawers, and some new stuff I got them. And she was talking about that very thing. Like, this was the first time back on Zoom, and her son walks by in his underwear and she didn't notice. And somebody just was like, do you know that there's like a naked child behind you? But she was kind of talking about that chaos where, we got to mute to, not hear the background noise, and yeah, that we have this commitment to perfection. And even I do it, like when the what are they called? The gardeners come by, and they're always making noise while I'm recording a podcast. And my son, my very first time, probably episode 4 or 5, I would say, and my boyfriend and my son started driving by my window on their quad, and I muted myself, and I forgot to hit unmute before I started talking. And so that was like the first time I had to actually cut out a big section to, because it kind of messed up. But if I had just let the sound be the sound, then it wouldn't have created more work for myself.
Well, that's it. Like, we create so much stress for ourselves. Like, you're worried about the sound, and the reality is, nobody would have, most likely they wouldn't have heard it, or if they did, it's just any passing car. They don't know who's in it.
Right.
But it's, we have our own internal pressure,
right,
to show up in a certain way.
Yeah. So tell us, you've alluded to your story, but tell us how you got into mental health.
Sure. So 15 years ago, my husband died by suicide. He had suffered from severe mental illness. And at the time of the loss, the family decided to tell everyone that he died in an accident because of the fear of stigma and the shame around mental illness, around suicide. I grew up and both of us grew up in a community that did not talk about it. And I think there are many, many communities out there that are similar. And the impact on me of holding that secret, I held it in for 10 years, did a real number on my mental health. I had depression, aside from the loss, experiencing the loss and everything that I went through there, not being able to grieve a suicide and pretending to grieve an accident where, I'm not talking about any details, and people are saying, well, what happened? I don't want to talk about it. And then I'm lying on top of that. And so, just having to suppress this huge part of my life and something that happened to me that was extremely traumatic, really had a huge impact on my health. And in addition to that, at the time, my sons were 4 and 7. And so obviously we lied to them as well. I told myself this was in their best interest, that if I can't understand how my husband got to this point, then how do I explain this to preschoolers, essentially? So I had huge amounts of anxiety, always worrying, what if, somebody accidentally tells them? What if they find out from somebody else before I'm ready to tell them? It was always my intention to tell them the truth, but in my mind, I thought, okay, I'll wait till they're adults, till they have their own children, then they'll understand why I made the choice that I did. But I was just in constant fear and fear of, somebody finding out and being called out on the truth and being called out as a liar, after all of that. So a lot of anxiety around that constantly.
Yeah. And it brings up the question, how honest do we want to be with our kids? And at what point? I think that you and I, in our pre-call, kind of talked about like divorce, and when there's infidelity in a marriage, or when something else, there's physical abuse, some other like reason besides we just don't get along. Right? Like that seems to be the acceptable thing that we can tell our kids, is we don't get along.
Yes. Yeah.
And which I can, say, hopefully my son doesn't listen to this podcast, but that was my experience in my marriage was, infidelity or potential infidelity, the plan of being
what's the word?
Unfaithful, maybe?
Unfaithful. Thank you. I was like,
Yeah.
his infidelity.
Yeah.
I was
It
like,
took me a second too. I was like, what is that word? But I don't know.
anyway, so yeah, there was I found evidence that there was a plan of being unfaithful, and that was like the final straw. That wasn't the only thing, but it was not the only time either. And it's not something that I've told him, and he asks questions. He's so curious. And I'm like, and I told him, there's certain things that I'm not going to tell you about our relationship. I can just tell you I was not happy in that relationship, and I wanted to be happy. And I found a way to be happy inside and outside of a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to be the best kind of mom for you. And I didn't think that I could be that with your dad. And anyway, so truth, like, it brings up that topic, like, at what point, when are they developmentally ready for the whole truth? And and then the pressure that you described of not being able to be honest about what happened with your husband, like, how do you grieve properly when you're holding that inside? It's like,
you don't.
Yeah,
You just don't.
Right. You just don't.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
it just didn't. It couldn't happen.
Right.
There was no closure while there was this huge secret being kept and this huge elephant in the room.
Yeah.
There's no way to heal from that when you're carrying a lie, and there's so much shame that I was carrying. It's like there was no room to even grieve the loss because the shame just took up all the space.
Wow. Yeah.
So it's a tough call, and I don't think there's a straight answer to when is the best time. I've spoken to many people who, unfortunately went through a similar experience. I remember the first person I talked to who had lost, they were connected with me. This was before I was doing this work. They were just connected with me as somebody who was widowed at a young age with a young child, and just, connect as somebody who knows what you're going through. And then she shared with me her husband had died by suicide. And I said, you know what? I am so envious of you that you're open about it and that you were open with your child, because I'm holding this secret. And it ended up being like, while she called me for support, I think we were supporting each other in our different ways. And so there was that, while, and I think I shared this with you before, there are parts of me that do not regret not telling them, because, kids in the same situation with divorce, often in any of these kinds of experiences, kids internalize it, and they look at, like, how might this have been my fault, and what might I have done to prevent it? And so my kids did not go through that experience. But at the same time, it took a huge toll on me, and my parenting as the only remaining parent that they had. The only way I could survive was basically by checking out. I was in survival mode. So, I was an absent parent in my own way. So it's interesting because, looking back, I'm not 100% certain that, how maybe how differently I would have done it. It's something that I've thought about a lot, because I did see how they were able to heal from his loss, in the first few years, and then sharing with them the truth when they were 15 and 18 at the time. And so being able to have conversations with them when they had matured and understood suicide, and, sadly being in high schools, had known people who had died from suicide, who understood mental illness. So it's a real toss-up, and I'm not encouraging anyone to not be truthful with their children. I'm just saying it's a really, like, there's no clear-cut answer of what's best. And, I'm just here to share, this was my experience, and, just the impact it had on me at the time. And today, my healing was definitely delayed. It's been 15 years, and really I've only done the healing for, say, the last, I don't know, maybe 7 years. To be able to get to the point of telling my kids the truth, and then healing from that, and healing the suicide, being able to talk about it, and which, I'm doing here, and I do quite a bit publicly.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's, 8 years of just, I'm not touching that part of my life. So that's, pretty impactful.
Yeah. And I think that, well, the crazy thing is that every time you say 15 years, my mind goes to 1970. I don't know why our brains do that. When somebody posted that we are as far from 1980 as 1980 is to 1939, I had to do the math. I had to pull out a calculator, and I was like, shut up.
Wow.
Right? It's mind-boggling.
I'm like, okay, process that. Yeah.
Right. And but that when we had our pre-call, and I think I even said to my boyfriend out loud, when I kind of told your story, that I was like, yeah, it was in the 70s that they had that. It didn't click to me until right now, where I was like, oh, it's 2021. That wasn't in the 70s. What the heck? Like,
I was born in, early 70s, but yes.
It's so weird, because I don't think of our society being that not okay with discussing suicide as in 2000 something, 3, 4, I don't know, 6. Thank you.
2006. Yes. I was like, wait, what year is it now?
Yeah, right. And like in 2006, I don't think of it as being that taboo of a topic. And maybe it's because, I had an uncle that had committed suicide in 82. And that's probably why my brain went there. Okay. Because it was kind of taboo then, but we talked about it sort of, not a lot. I never talked to my grandma about it. I couldn't imagine, even not as a mom, I couldn't imagine bringing that up.
Right. Well, and that's it. There's this idea of just like, don't talk about it. Right. It's, it's shame or blame. It's so different than if somebody died of old age or, of an illness. Then, yeah, we're talking about it. We're asking questions. We're talking about the individual, and that was an added component as well of, I was holding on to so much, anger and sadness and fear from what, the years prior to his death looked like for me, because we lived in complete chaos. He had severe mental illness. He had bipolar disorder and a form of schizophrenia. So he was manic and depressive, and had voices in his head telling him, what to do, and, that we're just in a constant battle. And so I never shared with anyone before he died what my life was like. I did, we did in the last couple of years, once he started getting treatment, I did go to a support group, and, but that was it. It was very contained. And then I went home, and it was like, okay, zip up. There were, maybe 2 or 3 friends who knew about it. The family, the older generation just couldn't grasp it, or, there's that toss up of like what you can grasp around mental illness and what you don't want to grasp around mental illness or accept. Right. So dealing with that piece as well. And just holding all of it in is the most unhealthy thing. But just to give you some context about 2006, so Facebook Facebook came out in a few months after my husband passed away. So it was not quite in existence yet. So there was not the availability and accessibility of all the different types of support groups, of people openly sharing things, of resources. It was really like, unless somebody's handing you a list, like, I don't even know that, and I was pretty computer savvy, but I don't even know that it dawned on me to like Google, being the wife of somebody with these mental illnesses. Like, I wasn't in that space.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I barely started Googling stuff that's going to help me.
Right?
I mean, if my son asks me a question I don't know the answer to, I literally tell him that's a Google question, and we'll ask Google. But
Yeah.
when it comes to me and like, how do I market this and how do I grow this, and don't ever do that. But
Right.
so one of the things you've said several times is the shame of the situation. And I think that we internalize it as shame. But my best friend passed away a little over 2 years ago. And she was like a second mom to my son. And every time we would bring her up, I would burst into tears. And so he stopped talking about her because he didn't want me to cry.
Yeah.
And he didn't like the feeling that he had in his own body when we talked about her. And so that's the other reason he didn't bring it up. And so we may, and that's why I wouldn't bring it up to my grandma, because I wouldn't want to cause her pain.
Yeah.
Right. And so, but that not talking about it is, we internalize it as the shame of what happens because it was a suicide. For in your case, right? And so there is no like I probably feel a little bit uncomfortable now talking to you about your husband's suicide, but only because I don't want you to feel any pain.
Right.
And you and I have talked about it before we hit record, where it's okay and you're good, and there's like really nothing that I can't ask you, but like I feel it. I feel the the discomfort in my body. Because I don't want you to feel pain. And so, but it gets internalized in you as the shame.
And the added component with suicide is, there's this idea that it's a choice somebody's making. And that, we forget it's not a logical mind that comes to the conclusion of, I want to end my life. Somebody has to be in very deep despair to get to that place. And usually it's, they say that it's really more the only way they can see to end the pain.
Right.
But we forget all of that. And so on a surface level, it's like, and even just like the terminology, we're changing the language around suicide. So instead of, it's always been commit suicide, which when we commit something, it's like, well, you only commit a crime or you commit adultery. It's that word is always associated with something pretty bad. Right. Bad or wrong. And that it's a choice and a commitment to make that. And it's not.
I did notice your language around it. I didn't I didn't think to ask why, but I did notice that you weren't using the word that
so
I
we
would have
say
used.
Right. So we say died by suicide, but that's the thing, that it's, this is just a signal of the society and our beliefs that like it is wrong to do that. And there are many people that believe that if you die by suicide, that's against God's will, and that there's something wrong with that, and not recognizing that this is a person who has crossed that. And the way I explain, and the way I've come to understand it, if, you know, you have the understanding of like the fight, we all have the fight flight instinct. You know, or even just like if you're underwater and you can't hold your breath anymore, you're going to be scrambling to get to the top. That because, you know, it just something kicks in that we fight to stay alive. And like it's beyond us. Like we're just like, I need breath, I need air, I need to stay alive. You know, maybe it's not conscious. Somebody who dies by suicide has somehow moved past that impulse to stay alive. So clearly it's not a brain that is logical or functioning properly if they can bypass that instinct. That is just embedded in every living creature out there, basically. Like we all have that survival instinct, and you know, theirs is not functioning. So yeah, it's the idea that somehow it was a choice. And you know, there's the idea, the shame too, of what more could I have done? You know, that was something that even though I did everything in my power, you know, and now 15 years later, you know, I mean, I needed years of therapy to work through that there was nothing I could have done. And I remember a therapist saying to me, if somebody wants to die, they're going to die. You know, you're playing God if you think you can keep them alive. And it was like, oh, okay. I get that perspective. It's true. And, you know, and that's what I witnessed with my husband as well, because I did have him hospitalized at one point, and he talked his way out of it and convinced them that no, he's fine, and that it was my fault, that I was angry at him and I was punishing him, and this is why I put him in the hospital. And he left the country. I'm in Canada. He went to the US, and 2 weeks later, you know, he ended, you know, it was over. And so I realized, like, okay, he had made the decision. And as an adult, there was nothing I could do other than like watching him with a hawk's eye, you know, 24/7. There was nothing I could do to prevent that from happening. And, you know, needing to let go of the fact that, you know, I am not a medical professional. I was, you know, his wife, and my role was to love him and be there for him, which I did. And the rest was out of my hands. But we will still always think like, what more could I have done? You know, right, like from the spouse to the, you know, old high school friends. Oh, I should have connected with them. You know, there's always the what could I have done? So that's another piece of the shame of, you know, somehow am I responsible?
Yeah, absolutely. And you've touched on so many things. My mind's like racing.
Sorry.
No, you're good. But something that I used to believe, so the two things that you hit on that you triggered my thought about, like that suicide is the most selfish thing that you can do. And so that's one, we could put a pin in it. And then the other thing is the religious aspect that you hit on. And I know people that are alive today because they believe it's a sin and they don't want to go to hell. And so there's this I have mixed feelings about disrupting that thought process. And the other thing I'm adding on to what you said is that it genuinely is that no human wants to die. They want the pain to stop, and they feel like they've exhausted all other options.
Yeah.
And I've said to my son, just because during COVID, there was a 13-year-old who killed himself. I don't know if that's the wrong language, but that's the language I'm using. But it was, you know, because he broke his computer monitor. And he had already broken his computer monitor by throwing his remote at it. And in December of 2019. And so he was afraid that that was the only way that he could connect with his friends at that point. And that thought was so awful that, you know, he took his life. And like, I could not, I saw my son in that, because that was his reality at the moment too. There were no friends. There was only computer friends. And I have said to him multiple times since then, this is a temporary feeling that you're feeling. Please, like you, and ending your life is a permanent solution to a temporary feeling.
Yeah.
And in certain cases, your husband, it was a temporary feeling that was lasting a really long time. And there's lots of other things happening. And you get to that point where it's like, it's not worth it to continue to suffer.
Yeah.
And, I'm glad that there are people out there like you. And my wish for this episode is that anybody who feels like they're in that situation, that there's always options.
Yes.
And it's okay that you're suffering. Like, it's not okay that you're suffering, but it's okay to tell people you're suffering.
Yeah.
So that we can heal.
Yes. Yeah.
So I said three things that I put pens in, but
I agree with you completely. And I just want to add one thing to this last point about getting support. And then, yes, we can circle back to the things you had pinned. One thing I say to people about, like 100%, if you are suffering, reach out for support, and also be discerning about who you reach out to. You don't want to reach out to the person who can't talk about, these kinds of things, who is not in touch with their own feelings, because, it has nothing to do with you, but if they're not in touch with their own stuff, if they can't accept this, if they don't feel it's okay to talk about, they may have the impact of shutting you down, making you feel worse that you came to talk to them, probably inadvertently, but it's important to think carefully about who you're reaching out to, within your circles. Like, find somebody that is open about these things, that is accepting about these things, that can just hold that space for you and not try to brush away what you're feeling, or reach out directly to professionals or support groups. There are so many now in the days of social media, as many complaints as we have about it. At the same time, there is so much access to support groups for pretty much anything you can be experiencing. You can join one of these groups and just literally stalk the page. Like, just look at what people are doing, look at how people are responding, what people are posting. You can post when you're comfortable, but just even seeing that, like, you are not alone in this and other people are going through it, and there are loving people out there that are available. It's important for us to see that.
And I want to piggyback on that with, like, every human has a capacity for supporting someone else. And some people are going to have a 12-ounce capacity of support. I'm showing, for those that are listening, I'm showing a 12-ounce cup, and then a 32-ounce capacity. And we can't be mad or take on personal responsibility for the people that only have the capacity to hold 12 ounces.
Or the shot glass.
Or the shot glass.
Smaller. Yes.
Yeah, I'm being generous with the 12 ounces. Because and that analogy came up with one of my clients, because she has friends that will pour all of their stuff into her. And then she'll turn around and try to give her stuff back to them, and they disappear on her, or they shut her down, or whatever the case may be. This has been in my experience with my friend who passed away. And I had another one of her friends come over to my house 2 months after it happened. And I mentioned Shelly, and I started to well up with tears. And she said, "Don't go there." And I was like, excuse me, I was really offended, because I'm like, you are the only person, you and like 2 other people understand what I'm feeling right now. It's the first time I've cried on my podcast. I'm super excited.
Yay, I'm glad I was here for that.
Yeah. But she just, now I'm looking back and having this analogy, she had the shot glass capacity, and maybe at other times she has a 12-ounce capacity or a 32-ounce capacity or whatever. But in that moment, she had a shot glass capacity for the emotion.
Yeah.
And I internalized that because of my history of people not being okay with me crying in
Right.
front of them.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, we can go back to whatever, we can move on to whatever, but, or you can.
Or we could be here with your tears.
Or we could be here with my tears. I said her name. And she's, I mean, when I say she was my best friend and the second mother to my child, that's what she was. Yeah.
Yeah. No. Tears are good.
Yeah.
Tears are clearing. I cry a lot too. And I've learned, because I was brought up, being told like, oh, you're so emotional, stop crying. Oh, there you go, crying again. And now I've just learned to reframe it, that it's just clearing. I'm releasing something and clearing it, and I am an exceptionally good clearer of stuff now.
Right.
Because there were many years that I needed to cry and I couldn't.
Yeah.
So now I view, or I would cry at the weirdest
Something
times.
else.
Like it leaks
Yes,
out. If you
it
don't
does.
let it run, it leaks. So just yeah. And now
And
it's
I
just
never-
like, okay, if it's here, if you're in a safe space, let it come out.
And I never mastered the skill of not being able to cry. I never, like, I'm so jealous that you were able to master that skill.
I'll tell
and
you
not,
something.
but yeah.
So what helped me master it was I actually gave myself 8 months. I didn't know it was going to be 8 months. I just gave myself permission to grieve and to cry when I started doing my deep work, when I finally realized like, okay, this is not good for me. I went back to therapy. I started doing like inner child work. I had a lot of stuff from my childhood that still was unresolved. And that's the thing about grief. Like when we're grieving something, it's like, we might grieve the death of someone, but with grief, it's not a logical emotion. I mean, most emotions are not logical, but basically everything that you've ever been sad about comes up. And I feel like anything that's unresolved shows up and becomes part of the grief. And that's why often it can feel so overwhelming for us, because it's like, okay, suddenly I'm grieving everything. And so I was intentional about that part. And when I went back to therapy, I told my kids, I said, you know what, I have a lot of things I need to work through in addition to my husband's loss. There were things from my childhood throughout my life. And I said, I'm going to be crying a lot. I'm okay, but I'm just letting you know you're going to see me crying a lot. And I literally, for me, it did take 8 months of literally, going to work, be sitting at my computer, like suddenly like, oh, here it comes, run to the bathroom, cry for 20 minutes, wipe the tears, fix my makeup, go back to my desk, keep going. And then I come home, it'd be like, okay, guys, we're ordering pizza. And, that's it. And I'd get in bed and I would just cry the rest of the night. Yeah. And then get up and do it again. And it was 8 months of just letting myself be sad about everything I had to be sad about, and not guilting or shaming. Again, the shame comes up for like, oh, you should, because how many times do we tell ourselves like, oh, you shouldn't feel this, like your life is good. Like even in the pandemic, like there's so much grief happening now of like, yes, the obvious ones of people that, have passed during this time, people, that have lost their lives, have been sick. And there's also canceled weddings, canceled trips to see families, losses of jobs, just even being shut down and isolated, like grieving. Sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
I said proms and graduations. And,
yes. My younger son went through that, though I don't think he was grieving it all too much. He was like, oh, thank God I don't have to go through that. That's a boy for you.
You probably were grieving because he was your baby.
I'm still grieving for him because I know I didn't have a prom, but yes, the graduation, I know it's a milestone. But how many people were like, well, I was healthy and my family's okay, I don't get to be sad. And it's like, well, you actually do, because the life as you knew it does not exist anymore. Whatever that was, it doesn't, you don't have to have a reason.
Right.
And then, and again, and then everything else that didn't turn out the way that we wanted it to shows up at the same time. And it's like, you get to grieve. Just, it's one of those emotions that feels very powerless, because it does require surrender. And we in our society are not about surrender at all. Like, unless you are into mindfulness, we're not surrendering to anything. It's like control. So we will shame ourselves to say, like, okay, do not feel that, because you don't have a right to.
Yeah.
And the irony is, emotions are just emotions. We're the ones that attach, judgment, whether it's a good one or a bad one. Yeah. So we have to do away with that.
Yeah. And I'm trying to teach my son that. And I remember sitting him down and saying, that men in our culture are, and it's not just men, but he's a man, or he's going to grow up to be a man. So, but men in our culture are programmed to not show emotion. And it's changing. We're changing it. All of us enlightened people are working on changing it, right?
Yeah.
And that you're going to run across people in your life that are close to you and that are not close to you, that are not going to be okay with your emotions. But you need to know that I am okay with your emotions, and you can always come to me with them. And he's really, I watch him, and he does that. He comes to me and he is so honest with me. And when he's not honest with me, it eats him up inside. And eventually he'll tell me.
Yeah.
And, but I see him with other people, and he'll put up a stiff upper lip, and I kind of like the dynamic, because he knows that he's okay to be who he is with me. And when he's pretending for other people, it pushes him to do things that he wouldn't normally do. So it's good. Like, it's a good dynamic it's fun to watch.
Yeah. It is very fun watching them grow up and
figure it out.
Yeah. And that's it. It's
we're all just figuring it out.
I guess it's just a level of self-management rather than the emotions happening to you. It sounds like he's more in command of, like, knowing when it's a safe space to release it and when it may not be a safe space for it to come out. And he'll figure it out, trial and error, and we all do. And
of course, we have a tendency to generalize that this person said, stop crying, and so now all people are uncomfortable with my tears.
Right. Yes.
So we got to be a little aware of that also. But it's a blessing and a curse to be a coach. From my perspective, because I listened to one of my nieces yesterday say, nobody likes me and nobody wants me around ever. And I just, like, that stabbed me in my heart, because I'm like, that's the limiting belief, and it's forming right now. And I said that to her parents, to my brother and his wife, and they're like, I swear she was born with that belief, and it couldn't be more untrue. And I was like, well, just like, remind her when she's in the good state, right? When she's in her happy state, get her to think about or point it out, like, hey, look how you're being included right now, and we love you, and you're loved, and point those out, because you can counteract that thing that she was, air quotes, born with,
Right.
That it's a middle child thing, like
right, yes.
But you can counteract it, because there's times when Xander will say, that's my son, will say, Larry is mean, and he's always mean, and I'm like, really? Because you guys have a lot of fun riding quads that he bought you.
Yeah.
I don't know about always mean. But
we tend to forget the good stuff in those
tend to forget
moments.
the good
Yes.
stuff, yes. Anyway, is there a piece of advice that you want to give to our moms listening?
I think the best thing I could say is just know that you are enough, you are doing enough. I don't think it's advice. I think it's just more like we're all struggling and it's a tough balance. It is tough to raise human beings.
Yeah.
That's really it. And, just know that it's okay. And nobody comes out of this, perfectly. I think, part of the experience of parenting and being parented is, this is the human experience. We're going to screw up.
Yeah.
And, so doing the best you can, knowing that you're doing your best is enough. And that was the hugest lesson I had to learn. When I went public with my situation, when I said, okay, I'm done with The Secret, I'm coming out of the proverbial closet, I quoted Maya Angelou, who says, do the best you can until you know better, and when you know better, do better.
Yeah.
And I hold by that. And so that's my words to all the other moms out there.
Yeah. I think that was the biggest gift I gave myself when I became a mom. And it was that nobody comes through childhood unscathed. And it's just those two things that you just said, and you're doing the best that you can with the tools that you have. And sometimes it's okay to go find new tools.
Yep.
And a tool can be a book, a tool can be a podcast, a tool can be hiring a coach, whatever you feel like you need in that moment, then like do that for yourself and get new tools. And
absolutely.
That's all we can do in life.
Yeah.
And how about a book? Is there a book that's been truly impactful for you in your personal development journey?
Yes. The book that comes to mind is Byron Katie's Loving What Is. Another coach gave to me at a very challenging part of my life. Another challenging part of my life. I had a couple.
One or two, right?
Yeah. It really helped me put things in perspective of how much our thoughts and our beliefs can take us down rabbit holes, and just accepting the reality of things, of just and again, it comes down to doing the best that we can, and just accepting where we're at in life, and letting go of feeling that we should be doing something different. So eliminating the word should from our vocabulary. And she basically says, if you should be doing it, then you would be doing it. And if not, let it go. Yeah. So that, those were a few perspectives for me that were big shifts of letting go of, carrying the world on my shoulders, essentially.
Yeah. And we have a tendency to do that as moms, don't we?
Oh, we sure do.
Well, thank you so much for being in here, pouring into our guests or our listeners, and for holding the space for me while I learned to embrace crying in front of other people.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to hold the space and for being a guest on your show. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. So we are going to have another episode of Imperfect Momming for you next week. And in the meantime, keep healing. Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to Imperfect Momming. It's time for us to step up and realize that our power is not in trying to shape our children. Our power lies in shaping ourselves into the people we want our children to model themselves after. Don't just do it for your kids. Do it for yourself. When you become a more self-aware, compassionate, and confident person, you and everyone around you benefit. For more information about me and my work, visit AlysiaLyons.com. That's AlysiaLyons.com. See you next time.